There is perhaps no figure in literature more fascinating than the trickster, appearing in various forms in the folklore of many cultures. Tricksters are always on the road. They are the lords of in-between. While we endeavor to trace the trickster to his origin, he continues to play his tricks on us, always evasive, always crossing our conceptual boundaries of definition in which we try to confine him. Perhaps here is a first lesson to be learned from the trickster. Whatever we do, he's always one step ahead of us. Trickster rises against the restrictions and authorities, the source of instant gratification, of bodily needs and wants, emotional impulses and drives that is in constant conflict with the superego, the internalization of cultural rules. An early and innocent form of trickster is parents playing peekaboo with their children to make them laugh. Trickster comes to us when we are too serious, rigid, when we follow rules and schedules, and when we lack a sense of humor. He causes us to forget what we intended to remember, say things we later regret, or appear in the form of a Freudian slip, and cause laughter. Perhaps no philosopher has written about the importance of laughter as eloquently as Nietzsche. Laughter mediates between the sacred and the profane, where Trickster resides. Laughter represents an attitude toward life and toward oneself, especially laughing at oneself. To laugh is deep inner work. It breaks through our persona and opens us up to a profound message. Trickster pinches us and tells us that life is a play. We are the actors on a vast stage following a predetermined script. However, he also tells us that we don't necessarily have to follow the script, that we can make our own, improvise and not be afraid of making mistakes, but rather laugh at them. We have the freedom and responsibility to do so. This is a core aspect of existentialist philosophy, which teaches us to become authentic and discover who we truly are. We can deceive others or be deceived, but we can never deceive ourselves. Trickster forces us to look at ourselves in the mirror and to the persona that we are putting on to impress others, to the detriment of our instinctual needs, our creativity and playfulness that is so vital to give us the energy that we need in our daily life. Trickster is against any authority. He pokes holes in rigid boundaries and calls into question fundamental assumptions about the way the world is organized and reveals the possibility of transforming them, even if often for ignoble ends. It is the figure that pushes us to question those in power and the limitations and rules that are imposed on us. His energy sweeps in and delivers hard knocks in an attempt to wake us up as individuals and as a culture. He steps in and points things out, asking a culture to look at its own folly, addressing hard topics with wit and humor, shining a light into shadowy areas and bring public attention to the underbelly of society. As an agent of change, Trickster triggers our fear of change and is an uneasy yet essential companion on the path of growth. The origins, liveliness, and durability of culture require that there be space for figures whose function is to uncover and disrupt the very things that cultures are based on. The totality of life consists of order and chaos, and the spirit of this disorder is the trickster. He is the Dionysian god of wine and music that connects us to instinctual forces that lie outside the bounds of all things civilized, and who seeks to break conventions and take us into wild, untamed places. The trickster points back to a primitive stage of consciousness which existed before the birth of the myth. Only when our consciousness reached a higher level could we detach the earlier states of ourselves and say anything about it. The trickster is a primitive cosmic being of divine animal nature, on the one hand superior to man because of his superhuman qualities, and on the other hand inferior to him because of his unconsciousness. The myth of the trickster, like many other myths, is supposed to have a therapeutic effect. It holds the earlier, low intellectual and moral level before the eyes of the more highly developed individual, so that he shall not forget how things looked yesterday. The so-called civilized man has forgotten the trickster. He remembers him only figuratively and metaphorically. When irritated by his own ineptitude, he speaks of fate playing tricks on him or of things being bewitched. He never suspects that his own hidden and apparently harmless shadow has qualities whose dangerousness exceeds his wildest dreams. For Jung, the trickster forms part of the shadow, both of which are dangerous to the extent that we keep them hidden from ourselves and project it onto others. He writes, "The trickster is a collective shadow figure, a summation of all the inferior traits of character in individuals. And since the individual shadow is never absent as a component of personality, the collective figure can construct itself out of it continually. Not always, of course, as a mythological figure, but in consequence of the increasing repression and neglect of the original mythologems, as a corresponding projection on other social groups and nations. The collective trickster energy is present in someone who looks like a leader, but is in reality the great pretender, one who convinces the people by promising truths but delivering lies. This figure appears, disappears, and reappears throughout all of human history. We think that the danger is the one who's trying to break into our house, but little do we know of the dangers of the unknown and repressed parts of ourselves, which causes us to lose our own self. Our self behind our self concealed should startle most. The trickster accompanies us into the rabbit hole, to the depths of our unknown self, to the valley of the shadow of death. However scary it is, Trickster helps us to find depths in ourselves that we didn't know were there. While the shadow helps us know our morality, the trickster is concerned with helping us reduce the sin of pride. He keeps us from being too confident in ourselves, since hubris forecasts a fall. Trickster is important in individuation because he helps deflate ego inflation when we become controlling, arrogant, or narcissistic. The healthy ego is our sense of who we are, serving as a bridge to the inner world. The trickster is the ego demolitions expert who helps us become more realistic about our psychological limitations and ultimately our spiritual limitlessness. This is an energy within ourselves and within the universe that humbles us, topples our ego, upsets our plans, demonstrates to us how little our wishes matter, and dissolves the forms that no longer serve us, though we may be clinging to them for dear life. When the ego is at its height, the trickster takes a little pin and bursts our bubble of greatness. And as we start to see the reality of things, everything that we thought to be meaningful, power, money, fame, pleasure, becomes meaningless. Trickster helps to humble us down and tells us that our power is limited in the vast universe. This surrender is a necessity for self-realization and a connection with the divine. Instead of the great helping the lowly, Trickster reverses this and disguises himself as someone very lowly, but this lowly person overcomes the so-called great person, one who has an inflated ego. The Bible has a passage that expresses this trickster energy clearly. But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty, and base things of the world and things which are despised hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are. No matter how lowly you are, or how utterly useless you might feel in life, there is always something in the higher self, or God, that still calls you. The trickster, in the form of the alchemical Mercurius, can be said to contain the totality of the psyche, both the unconscious and the conscious mind, the known and the unknown, and the light and dark within us all. The psyche seeks balance, not staying in extremes, but a combination of opposites. The transcendent function in alchemy is where the psyche finds the midpoint. This occurs when the time is just right, that is, in synchronicity. In a way, not enough or too much are the trickster. The extremes are how we get tricked. However, Trickster is trying to point us towards the center, to the path of individuation. This reminds one of what Aristotle said about virtue, that it is a point between a deficiency and an excess of a trait. For instance, the golden mean of confidence is between self-deprecation and vanity. As one becomes more balanced in life, one also reaches psychic wholeness. Tricksters are always on the scene, attempting to show culture its shadow and the inevitable changes that are afoot. In mythological terms, the battle between the forces of creation and destruction, as typified by trickster polarity, are as alive and well in the modern world as they were for our ancestors. Trickster makes its way to the world stage via the psyche of the individual. We must come to terms with inner conflicts in order to gain more clarity about the outer conflicts we seem as a culture to be mired in. The integration of the trickster archetype allows us to go from being ruled by our own self-centered ego to a new way of living in which one has integrity and relatedness. Trickster allows us to discover ourself, the totality of the personality which unites the opposites of consciousness and the unconscious and holds everything together in balance and unity. Trickster attempts to wake us up and in the process shake us to the core of our being. Perhaps this is because he embodies fundamental patterns that we fiercely struggle with and desperately need to reconcile within ourselves and our world. Through negotiating and disrupting conventions and boundaries, Trickster broadens the realm of human potential. While Trickster may bring us difficult lessons, he is also the force that allows us to imagine and create entirely new possibilities.